Britain promised the same land to 3 different people in under 3 years, and kept the oil for itself. Right now, as you watch this, oil prices are whipsawing on every headline from the Gulf. Conflict is burning across Iran, Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf, and every border in those headlines, every line on every map behind every news anchor, traces back to one secret document, drawn by 2 men in a closed room in 1916. In Mosul, in that same year, a textile merchant loads his caravan for Aleppo. His family has run this route for generations. He crosses no borders because there are none. From Baghdad to Damascus to Jerusalem, it is one connected market under one empire. He does not know it yet. But 2 men he will never meet have already drawn lines through the middle of his world. Why did 2 empires secretly divide the Middle East? While promising it to the very people who lived there, what does an oil pipeline have to do with the most famous random line in history? And who has been paying for those lines ever since? The answers are sitting in declassified files, published treaties, and numbers anyone can check. One of those answers is already in your pocket. Part of the price you paid at the pump this week is a war premium, and the wars run along these lines. To understand the wars on your screen today, you need to go back to 1915. The First World War is tearing Europe apart, and the Ottoman Empire, ruler of the Arab Middle East for 400 years, is dying. Britain needs the Arabs to revolt against it, so Britain makes an offer. Through letters between Henry McMahon, Britain's man in Cairo, and Sharif Hussein of Mecca, Britain promises support for Arab independence, one great Arab state, in exchange for an Arab uprising. Hussein agrees. His sons will lead the revolt. But in London, a different conversation is happening. A member of parliament named Mark Sykes stands before the war cabinet, slides his finger across a map, and says he would like to draw a line from the E in acre to the last K in Kirkuk. Remember that sentence. It will come back later in this video, and it will not mean what you think it means. Through the winter of 1915, Sykes negotiates with a French diplomat, François-Georges Picot. By January 1916, they have a deal. By May, both governments ratify it, in total secrecy. France takes the north, the Syrian coast, Lebanon, and influence stretching east toward Mosul. Britain takes the south, Baghdad, Basra, the ports of Haifa and Acre, and the right to build a railway from Baghdad to the Mediterranean. Palestine is set aside for international control. Read the actual text, and it sounds less like diplomacy and more like a business contract. Ports, railways, customs duties, priority of right of enterprise and local loans. 2 empires, dividing assets. Back in Mosul, the merchant knows none of this. His ledger records what his world looks like: cloth bought in Aleppo, sold in Baghdad, profit moving freely along roads his great-grandfather used. In London, men who will never walk those roads have already divided them. That ledger, the one recording a free trade route his family has used for generations, is the last entry it will ever make in a world without borders. Every line drawn after this point is a line his descendants will have to cross with paperwork, tariffs, or a checkpoint. In June 1916, trusting Britain's promise, the Arabs revolt. They fight and die for an independence that was signed away 1 month earlier in secret. The secret holds for 556 days. Then it explodes. November 1917 delivers 2 shocks in 3 weeks. On November 2nd, Britain's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, publicly promises support for a Jewish national home in Palestine, territory wrapped inside the secret deal, beside the land promised to Hussein, the 3rd promise in 3 years. Then, on November 23rd, the Bolsheviks, who have just seized power in Russia and found the secret treaties in the imperial archives, publish the full text of the Sykes-Picot Agreement in Izvestia and Pravda. 3 days later, the Manchester Guardian reprints it in Britain. The Arabs fighting and dying on British promises read the truth in a Russian newspaper. And here is where the standard story ends and the real story begins, because the lines are about to move, and what moves them is oil. In August 1918, Balfour tells the Prime Minister that Britain must control Mesopotamia to secure its oil. When the war ends that November, British troops push north and take Mosul after the armistice is already signed. Then, on December 1st, 1918, French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau visits London. At the French embassy, behind closed doors, British Prime Minister Lloyd George asks him to surrender France's claim to Mosul, the province sitting on suspected oil. Clemenceau agrees on two conditions. France gets Syria, and France gets a share of Mosul's oil. The two men shake hands. They write nothing down. They do not even tell their own foreign ministers. A province of hundreds of thousands of people changes empires in a single conversation, priced in barrels. In April 1920, at San Remo, the deal is signed in ink. The carve-up is complete. The most famous random line in history was never random. Sykes' line from Acre to Kirkuk traced the planned route of a British oil pipeline to the sea. That detail is buried in the record. When Sykes spoke his famous sentence, Britain's own War Secretary, Lord Kitchener, clarified in the room what the line really meant: the path along which oil would flow from Kirkuk to the Mediterranean. Acre sits beside Haifa, the port Britain claimed in the deal. The line in the sand was infrastructure. Follow the assets, and the whole map finally makes sense. Watch what the new map does first. At San Remo, France trades its claim to Mosul for 25% of the Turkish Petroleum Company, the consortium holding Iraq's oil rights. Britain assembles a brand new country called Iraq from three separate Ottoman provinces: Mosul, Baghdad, Basra, wrapped around that oil, and imports a king, Faisal, who has never lived there. And France splits its own zone into Syria and Lebanon. By the mid-1930s, the map turns into steel. One pipeline running from Kirkuk to British-controlled Haifa, and another from Kirkuk to French-controlled Tripoli. Two pipelines because two empires refused to share one. That same pipeline route, the one Sykes drew with his finger in 1916, is the reason that 25% of Iraq's oil belonged to France before Iraq existed as a country. Every liter flowing through it today still moves along a line that was never about people. It was about where the oil could leave the ground and reach a tanker. Then the cracking begins. States built around assets and not people cannot hold. The borders have split communities and bound rivals together under imported rulers. When the empires withdraw after the Second World War, the engineered structures are left standing without their engineers. Iraq's monarchy falls to a coup in 1958. Syria cycles through coups of its own. Lebanon's carefully balanced system collapses into civil war. And every time a state cracks, outside powers step back in, because the assets the borders were built around are still there. The merchant's grandson now pays customs at three frontiers his grandfather crossed with a handshake. And the cracks become the wars on your screen. Invasions and uprisings tear through the system until June 2014, when ISIS films a bulldozer smashing through the border berm between Iraq and Syria and titles the video "The End of Sykes-Picot." Here is the precise truth. That exact border was finalized years after 1916, but it is a direct child of the carve-up that began in that London room. The men with the bulldozer named the right ancestor. The bill kept landing far from the region. America's wars across this map since 2001 have cost roughly $8 trillion. That is not the region's money. That is your taxes, your deficit, and your interest payments. Now step back and look at the whole thing. A secret map in 1916. An oil deal in 1920. A broken kingdom in 1958. A bulldozer in 2014. And the prices and wars on your screen tonight. Take away any one of those, and the next one never happens. Here is what the chain has cost, in numbers that anyone can check. 25% of Iraq's oil, handed to France at San Remo before Iraq even existed as a country. Roughly $8 trillion spent by the United States on post-9/11 wars across this map, by Brown University's count. Around 900,000 people directly killed in those wars, 38 million people displaced, and an estimated $2.2 trillion already committed to caring for American veterans through 2050. That last number is your anchor. If you are an American between 25 and 45, you will be paying for wars along these lines until you retire through your taxes, whether or not you ever look at a map. And someone you know, a cousin, a classmate, a co-worker, probably deployed to a country whose borders were drawn in that room. In Mosul, the merchant's great-grandson is rebuilding. His city has been taken, broken, and retaken. The family that once traded across an open world has spent a century paying for lines it never drew, in customs, enclosures, in wars arriving at the door. 4 generations, one inheritance, someone else's map. The mainstream story says two careless men drew random lines and accidentally broke the Middle East. The documents say the opposite. The lines were drawn with precision, around a pipeline route, two ports, and an oil field, and were redrawn the moment the oil moved. The borders did not fail because they were thoughtless. They failed because they were never about the people at all. So here is my question for you. If the lines had followed the people instead of the pipeline, would the last century have been different? Or would the oil have drawn new lines anyway? Tell me below. Britain kept the pipeline. France kept the coastline. The Arabs got borders drawn around oil that was never theirs. And a century later, the bill still arrives. At your pump, in your taxes, on your screen. This story is not over. The borders drawn in that room are still the borders on tonight's news. The oil still flows along corridors chosen in 1916, and the powers that drew the lines are still paying to defend them. The Meridian Ledger exists for one reason, to show you the economic machinery behind the headlines, who signed what, who paid, and who is still paying. If you want to see the rest of the ledger, subscribe. Every crisis has a history. Every history has a ledger. This has been the Meridian Ledger.